And viewers, the Trump-Putin meeting that took place in Alaska did have the world on the edge, and the proposition of a second summit in Moscow sent shockwaves around the world. But 48 hours after the summit, Trump is now set to meet the Ukrainian president. Is that a real shot at peace? Well, we are waiting to find out the answer, because the last time the optics were completely different. And viewers, there are two aspects when you talk about the developments that are taking place. On one end is the prospect of ending the longest war since the Second World War, the contours of the peace formula. Has the summit actually been just about optics, or has it set the stage for a peace deal, is one aspect of it. And second, the Trump tariffs, which are related to the Ukraine-Russia conflict, and whether or not Donald Trump is able to thrash out a peace deal in time or not. We're going to try and connect the dots for you, debate both aspects. But first up, let's play out exactly what the leaders said at the conclusion of their longest face-to-face meeting ever.
I will say that I believe we had a very productive meeting. There were many, many points that we agreed on, most of them, I would say, a couple of big ones that we haven't quite gotten there, but we've made some headway. So there's no deal until there's a deal.
Incidentally, when the new administration came to power, bilateral trade started to grow. It's still very symbolic. Still, we have a growth of 20%. As I've said, we have a lot of dimensions for joint work. It is clear that the U.S. and Russian investment and business cooperation has tremendous potential. Russia and the U.S. can offer each other so much in trade, digital, high-tech, and in space exploration. We see that Arctic cooperation is also very possible.
US President Donald Trump is moving from Alaska to Washington and from Putin to Zelenskyy. After his high-profile summit with Russia's Vladimir Putin fell short of a ceasefire, Trump now says he will host Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy at the White House on Monday. The Alaska summit itself was heavy on cinematic backdrops, fighter jets, blue podiums with Pursuing Peace banner, Air Force One, but light on deliverables. Critics abroad accused Trump of rolling out a red carpet for Putin while getting nothing in return. Senator Jeanne Shaheen called Putin a murderous dictator, warmly received on American soil. For Zelenskyy, left out of the Alaska talks, the White House invitation is both reassurance and responsibility. On X, he said he will come to Washington to discuss all of the details regarding ending the killing and the war. He stressed that any deal must include European involvement and firm security guarantees, thanking partners but warning that Ukraine cannot stand alone. For Putin, the optics were invaluable. Shackled by International Criminal Court warrants that limit his travel to more than 100 countries, the US summit was a stage he craved, one that only Washington could provide. He declared that the talks had paved a path to peace, but again offered no specifics. In Europe, the reaction ranged from anger to exasperation. Estonia's foreign affairs chief said Putin had humiliated the US and that Trump must apply real pressure if he wants results. Lithuania's defense minister called Putin's words gaslighting and veiled threats, pointing out that Russia was bombing civilians even as he spoke of peace. The Czech foreign minister went further, warning that Kremlin propaganda was already at work. If Putin was serious about peace, he would not have been attacking Ukraine all day. The contrast is stark. Putin walked away with legitimacy on a global stage. Trump walked away with promises of progress but no ceasefire. And Zelenskyy? He walks into the White House on Monday carrying Europe's expectations and the fate of Ukraine's negotiating hand. The big question now, will Washington deliver substance where Alaska offered only spectacle? Or will history remember Anchorage 2025 as Putin's photo op and Zelenskyy's uphill climb? Ridhima Kedia for NDTV World.
All right, viewers, we told you exactly what transpired at the summit, the kind of reactions that came in from around the world, and most importantly, now what lies ahead. 48 hours, and there will be the crucial meeting between Donald Trump and Zelenskyy. Let's get in Ambassador Sanjay Bhattacharya joining us on the broadcast to talk more about what this could potentially mean. Ambassador Bhattacharya, thanks so much for speaking to us on NDTV. Let me start by asking you, does peace really have a real chance right now, or do you think this is a summit that's been very big on optics with very little in terms of takeaways that could show the path towards a peace formula?
I think the summit was essentially, for Putin in particular, a summit between the presidents of the United States and Russia, in which there was mention and discussion of Ukraine, but that was not the principal reason why he was there. I think he sees himself and Russia as a great power, and he wants us to regain Russia's position on the global stage. And therefore, for him, the economic aspects, the strategic issues were of much greater consequence. How to deal with European security was something that Putin was very concerned about. Of course, there were discussions on Ukraine as well. And I think on that, Putin held his ground. But I think the talks did make progress because, as we see unfolding in 2 days' time, Zelenskyy will be in D.C. to have a conversation with President Trump. And
so
then, of course, there is
some forward movement, even if it's incremental in nature. But the other question I want to ask is what you started this interview with, which is that for Putin, there was in fact many positive wins. Positive messaging, some would say even mainstreaming, longest face-to-face meeting with Donald Trump, setting foot on American soil. It's a long list. And the fact that he got to speak ahead of the host leader as well. In your sense, when you add that all up, the messaging, the optics, and the larger point it makes for Putin, the wins, what does that add up to?
Well, Putin was very careful and very diplomatic in his approach. I think he took the initiative on a number of aspects regarding the relations with the United States, regarding even the status of Alaska. And then, of course, on the key issue that most people were actually waiting to hear, there was actually very little. But he did say that such a war would not have taken place if Trump had been president in 2022. So I think in many ways, Putin played his cards very well. I must also say that the outcomes, for me, do reflect that there are two positive things that come out, and I would like to highlight the two of them. The first is that it is now recognized, even by Donald Trump, that it is not a mediation that is going to create this magic formula. There has to be a discussion between the two parties. Now, whether that's going to happen and in what format, we'll have to wait and see. The second thing that has come out of this is that in this particular process, it is not necessarily a ceasefire, but moving towards a peace deal. And that is something which I think the Russians were much more insistent on. Okay. And I think, in a sense, it puts the Europeans in a corner as well.
Mm-hmm. Which brings me to ask you that minutes after he finished and concluded that Alaska summit, the first soundbite, the first interview that Donald Trump gave, he did mention that Ukraine will have to accept the deal. That's the first big statement that he made right after the Alaska summit. And now 48 hours later, he's actually going to meet Zelenskyy. How do you think that sets the stage for how he would want, how Donald Trump would want that this war should end, for Ukraine to accept the formula that he thinks could probably be most suitable to end this at the earliest?
I think both Trump and Putin see this as a question of global stability and European security, in which there is a very fundamental role of NATO. Now, remember, till before the NATO summit, Trump was actually a great friend of Putin, and he was advocating brokering this deal and bringing about peace. But I think something happened at the NATO summit where the Europeans gave in on the question of assuming greater responsibility in terms of their defense expenditure, and got a deal out of Trump that he would stay engaged in the European theater. So I think that changed the equation somewhat. And you did see for the last couple of months, there was much more angry notes coming from Trump regarding Putin. But I think this particular meeting has taken them back to the original position that Trump had about Putin.
Ambassador Bhattacharya, before I let you go, final question on the Trump tariffs. He again made some off-the-cuff remark, Donald Trump, but those remarks were very significant, where he said, I'm going to think about whether to impose tariffs or not. Everyone knows that those tariffs are linked to the conflict here and Donald Trump's ambition to end it at the earliest. It has nothing to do with India importing Russian oil, because India is not an exception. Many countries are doing in much larger quantity than India. How do you see those tariffs part of the puzzle coming out for India?
I think that is the third big outcome of this particular meeting, particularly the question of tariffs on Russia in particular, and the question of subsidiary tariffs, which actually affect us. And I think on that particular ground, we don't see any very clear delineation, but there is a signal that these subsidiary tariffs will not hold and that Trump will take a call on that in 2 to 3 weeks. And I think there is justification for that, because if we're really to be honest about subsidiary tariffs, he should actually levy them on the European Union, which imports the bulk of
Japan. And NDTV has been very clearly etching out all those details for our viewers to understand that this is American hypocrisy 101 and why it needs to be called out. I'm going to leave it there, sir. Thanks so much for speaking to us on that very important story. And in fact, let me now rope in Fred Ware, who's a senior journalist joining us from Russia. Olia, who's the head of the Foreign News Desk, joining us live from Ukraine. And we have Dr. Brent Nelson, who's the professor of politics and international affairs, and joining us live from South Carolina. Thank you so much, all of you, for taking out the time speaking to me on NDTV. Dr. Brent, let me start with you first, which is in 48 hours from now, there is expectation that there will be further progress from the first round of meetings that took place between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. They essentially set the stage for what may happen next. How confident are you that this time around Zelenskyy would be asked no questions around gratitude, no questions around whether he's wearing a formal attire, no questions around ending the meeting ahead of schedule, and no lunch as well? And do you think it's actually going to lead to some progress as far as the conflict is concerned?
I do think the relationship between Presidents Trump and Zelenskyy is much better than it was coming out of that famous Oval Office dispute that they had. I do think that what we're seeing right now is the beginning of negotiations. I am surprised how little we know of what was talked about in that conversation between Putin and Trump. And really, what we're mostly doing is talking about what wasn't said. I think it's very important what was said, and I think that's what Zelenskyy and Trump will talk about on Monday. I don't think that there will be some sort of demand made by President Trump of Zelenskyy. I don't think there's a deal on the table that Zelenskyy will have to accept or not accept. I think this is now the time to bring Zelenskyy into the process, which began in Alaska yesterday with all of the visuals of two world leaders on the same stage. I think that had to happen for Putin to be engaged. Now he's engaged. Now Trump is engaged. Now we're bringing Zelenskyy in. But I still think we're at very early days in this conversation that
And let's get that view from Ukraine then. Olia, let me bring you in, which means that if these are very early days, this means that the process may be long drawn. The grinding war may continue, and the momentum that Russian forces have received in the last couple of weeks may continue as well. Is Ukraine prepared for that?
Yes, well, what we see also from the polls, Ukrainians are ready to wait, and they are not for any negotiations that will look like surrender, because when we are now talking, There were several references to sources in the media appearing that once more President Putin wants territory swap, and it looks like let's swap small, give me a whole Donetsk region, and I will give you small tiny bits of territory in the other regions. And this looks like this is not like a deal, but rather like surrender. So if we look on what we have in the polls, Ukrainians do support the ceasefire and negotiations, but those that will stick to our positions, so to the positions of the Ukraine and the EU, which were already mentioned by them.
All right.
So this is the one point. The other point, of course, is the credibility of what was said by President Putin, because it was already mentioned by President France Macron that earlier we've seen that what was said by Putin was not then like in live. Yes, so that's the other issue which we have. And when we talk about
hold your thought. I'm going to come back to you with the other aspect of this. But Fred, then, which brings me to ask, and I'm sure many people watching this broadcast would be wondering just that Ukraine says no territorial swap. Right now, 19% or around 19% of Ukrainian territory is under Russian control. They're not going to agree to any of that. And that's the starting point for Russian negotiators, that we want to keep the territory that we won through this grinding war for 3.5 years. We're not going to let go of that. So what deal, what middle ground are we really talking about?
Well, they are also talking
Fred,
because...
let me ask that to Fred. Ollie, I'm going to come back to you. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes, that's okay. Well, I think one thing that has to be observed here is that when people say Putin isn't serious about peace, they're right. He is serious about victory. This is what he wants. They've been fighting for well over 3 years. They've taken enormous, heavy price. They have these war objectives, which Putin at this point, since it's pretty clear from all the reporting that his forces are winning and perhaps close to some breakthroughs on the front in Donbass, he's not going to compromise on it. And I'm pretty sure that's what he told Trump yesterday in the meeting, whatever else they talked about. Trump has until now said that the other things on Putin's agenda, that is the normalization of relations, trade, economic cooperation, and so on, all that is dependent on ending the war. End the war first, then we can talk about all that good stuff. I think that Trump has perhaps changed his mind. He's certainly withdrawn his demand for an unconditional ceasefire. He quite explicitly did so. And even European leaders have stopped talking about it as a precondition for talks. So we are inching forward. And I'm sorry to say this, but it's probably going to be mostly on Putin's terms, unless someone can think of a way to reverse the battlefield dynamics.
So those battlefield dynamics are very important, but it's also time then to talk about the kind of wins that Vladimir Putin saw. And in fact, viewers, it's extremely important that we've been talking about the optics that came here, but also who really came out on top from the Alaska summit. Some of the important wins of Vladimir Putin, we just want to put out right here for you to better understand as to what really happened, and more importantly, who actually came out as having an upper hand. First and foremost, he got to visit the US military base. It sends out a very powerful and strong message that this was a summit that took place at an American military base, heavily guarded. So a huge win in terms of a positive takeaway for Vladimir Putin. Second most important aspect, look at the kind of bonhomie, the red carpet welcome, shaking of hands, the laughter that they shared. All that adds up to the very positive, warm vibe that the two leaders shared. Very contrary to what it has been so far with Europe, with several other allies of America, where Putin has been in the deep freeze, so to say. Next important part, there's been no word on secondary sanctions, so that war economy of Russia continues without additional secondary sanctions, and that is a huge important aspect of being able to continue the assault and ensure the economic momentum also survives without additional layer of sanctions coming in. Next up, the summit also gives more time for Vladimir Putin and his forces. We've been talking about the military momentum that Russian forces have right now. That window, in fact, increases going forward for Russia, and that's an extremely important aspect as well. In addition to this are some of the other optics that we've been talking about on the broadcast, and let's go back to ask this question to the panelists here. And let's put that out to the Ukrainian guest joining me, which is Olva, the fact that these wins, when you add them up, these are not isolated diplomatic wins, but they point to a larger indication of how Donald Trump may be willing to concede to some of those very important aspects of Vladimir Putin's central objectives of the war. Does that mean that the peace deal that we're talking about may remain elusive?
Well, I would say it from the point, what I see as an analyst from what's going on in Russia. If we look at the economy, Russia transferred its economy to the war economy. Yes, several other branches are now working much worse, but those that are needed for the war are transformed and are developing. So it means that, but from the other side, Russian economy, as we see from the economists, it is in a very difficult situation, and we might see the crisis like the next year. There are several, you can check it over the experts, but there are several references to that. So it means that Russia will go on with the war, and this is what we've seen. And of course, the other point is when Putin was talking to Trump in Alaska, so the war was going on, and it doesn't look like they are ready to stop. However, just to counter what the Russian guest said, I've checked while you were speaking. So Russia moves like 15 square kilometers per day. So to get the whole Ukraine, it will need over 100 years. And it is impossible because over that time, all the soldiers will die. So it is impossible to get the whole
Doomsday scenario. We're not really at doomsday scenario, but how far away are we from doomsday scenario is also a very important aspect to keep in mind, given the fact that this is Europe's or the world's longest conflict, longest war since the Second World War. And let me give the last word as far as the final word to Dr. Brent here, which is how do you see now the conflict resolution going in from here? There's been an important meeting that has taken place. Another one is likely on Monday. European and NATO allies have been wanting to be part of this peace resolution. They are nowhere to be included anytime soon. At least that's what Donald Trump's plans are so far. How do you see this moving ahead? If you think it's going to be as slow as you predicted at the beginning of this broadcast, then we are looking at a long time before there is some sort of a peace framework.
Yes, I think it is going to be a long time. As I said, I think this is the beginning of the beginning. Donald Trump will have lots of changes of mind. We know that from our past experience. He will threaten sanctions once again, and then he'll pull them back. There will be a lot of there are going to be a lot of other things happening between now and when peace is finalized. I do think that this is still a war that Putin wants to keep fighting. I also think that Ukraine needs some wins on the battlefield to really focus Putin's attention on coming up with a deal. And the final point I think is important. The United States seemed to hint yesterday that they are willing to help guarantee Ukraine's security in the future. There will be no deal if Ukraine doesn't have security guarantees, and there will be no security guarantees unless the United States backs up Europe in those guarantees. So I think we have to get to that point before we will see any kind of deal finalized.
All right. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining me on this special broadcast. The focus continues to be on whether or not the ice summit may have broken the ice between Russia and America. But what happens next? Does it pave the way for peace, or is it just about good optics? That is very important for the two leaders, their global audiences, but most importantly, their home constituencies. Well, in 48 hours from now, viewers, we will hopefully have some update and idea in terms of which way this conflict resolution is headed. And that will also answer the one question that is going on again and again in Donald Trump's mind as to whether he's eligible for a Nobel Peace Prize or not. I'm going to leave it there. Thanks so much for watching this edition of the News at 9.